Montana Territory, 1879, the day Florence Granger said no to Jasper Bell's offer. The sky cracked wide with thunder, and the banker's face twisted like he had been slapped. "You think you can keep this land without money, Miss Granger?" Jasper leaned over her porch rail, his gloved hand gripping the post like he owned it. "You've got 30 days to pay what your father owed." "That's more mercy than others got." Florence stood barefoot in the dirt, arms folded, the hem of her dress dusted red. Behind her, the cabin leaned with age, and beyond that, her late father's land stretched toward the distant cottonwoods, all of it dry from the summer drought. Her fingers curled tight against her arms. "I am not selling to you," she said. "You are not listening." His voice dipped low. "This is not a choice." She did not flinch. "You will not get this land." Jasper's jaw ticked. He turned without another word and swung up into his buggy, the wheels throwing gravel as he snapped the reins. Florence waited until he was gone before she let her shoulders drop. She turned, walking slow back toward the cabin. Inside, her younger brother and sister sat at the table, their faces pale. "Was that him again?" Hazel asked, clutching her doll. Florence nodded. "Go on, eat. There's bread and beans." She sat across from them, her eyes on the ledger beside the stove. They had 29 days now, and nothing but a patchy crop, an old mule, and a barn with a broken door. She had buried their father last winter and their mother the year before that. She had no husband, no money, no time. That night, a storm rolled down from the mountains. Rain hissed against the roof, and the wind bent the trees until they creaked like old bones. Just after midnight, the dog barked. Florence was up in a blink, shotgun in hand. She stepped out onto the porch, barefoot again, nightshirt clinging to her in the wind. Something large was slumped near the gate. She raised the barrel, heart pounding. "Who's there?" a groan answered her. "Do not shoot." She stepped forward, the rain soaking her hair in seconds. The man lying in the mud wore a duster coat torn at the shoulder, blood black against the gray fabric. His hat had fallen beside him, and his face was ghost pale, jaw tight with pain. "I am not here to rob you," he said. "Then what are you doing bleeding on my land?" "I had a choice between dying in the canyon or crawling until someone found me. Lucky me, I guess." His voice cracked. "You got a name," she hesitated. "Florence Granger." He blinked at the sky. "Franklin Foster, U.S. Ranger, or was until about 3 bullets ago." She lowered the gun. "You are bleeding to death." "That was my guess, too." Florence dragged him inside with more strength than she knew she had. By dawn, she had stitched up his arm and shoulder, packed the wounds with turpentine, and pressed a whiskey bottle into his hand. "You are lucky none hit bone," she said. He winced as he sipped. "Your idea of lucky is interesting." He slept through most of the next 2 days. On the third, he sat up and asked for bread. Hazel peered at him from behind the doorframe, and Florence saw the way Franklin's gaze softened when he noticed the child. "You got kids?" he asked. "My brother and sister." "Our parents died last year. I am all they have." He nodded slowly. "You are doing a good job." She looked away, her jaw tight. "Not good enough. Bank wants our land. Gave me a month." He was quiet a moment. Then, "What does he want it for?" "Expansion." "Jasper Bell owns half the town already." "Wants to dam the river, sell water back to the valley." "And you said no." "I did." He nodded once. "Good." That evening, Franklin asked for his coat. She handed it over, watching as he fished something from the inside pocket, a folded badge, scratched and scarred. "Ranger's not a job you retire from," he said quietly. "But I was out past Fort Benton tracking men who burned a Blackfoot farm. Got ambushed 2 nights ago. They are still out there." She looked at the badge. "Why tell me?" "Because I owe you. You saved my life." "That matters." She shook her head. "I did what anyone would." "No," he said. "You did what the right kind of person would." They sat quiet a while, the fire crackling low between them. Later that week, Franklin stood, leaning heavy on a cane he had carved from a fence post. He walked the fence line with Florence, pausing now and then to catch his breath. She told him about the well gone dry, the broken plow, the barn roof caved in. He listened without interrupting. I do not know what I am going to do, she said finally. I have no way to earn that much money. You should not have to, he said. This land is yours. But that does not matter to the bank. He turned toward the fields. Then we do not go through the bank, she frowned. What do you mean? I mean, if Jasper Bell is stealing land from folks, he is not doing it legal. Rangers have jurisdiction. I want to see what he is hiding. Florence stared at him. You can barely walk. He looked back at her, something steady and quiet in his eyes. Then you will help me. The next morning, she hitched the mule and rode into town with Franklin beside her. They were stopped twice, once by a deputy who eyed Franklin's badge with suspicion, and again by Jasper Bell himself, standing in front of the bank with a smug smile. Well, well, he said. Back already, Miss Granger, and with a friend, Franklin stepped forward. Ranger Franklin Foster out of Helena, here on investigation. Jasper lost his smile. On what grounds? Land fraud, water rights tampering, threats of coercion. You want me to keep going? Jasper's eyes flicked to Florence. You brought him into this. Florence lifted her chin. He is helping me reclaim what is mine. Jasper bared his teeth. You are making a mistake, girl. No, Franklin said, his voice cold. You did. They walked past him and into the records office. That night, back at the cabin, Florence sat on the porch with a blanket over her knees. Franklin came out and eased into the chair beside her. He looked tired, but better, whole. You think we have a chance? She asked. I do. She turned to look at him. Why are you really helping me? He met her eyes. Because you are not someone who gives up, because you took me in when you had nothing, because I have not felt this alive in a long time. Her heart beat faster. You barely know me. I know enough. She looked at his hand resting on the armrest between them. Slowly, she laid hers over it. He did not move away. The stars blinked above them, and for the first time in months, Florence felt hope press against her ribs like a heartbeat. 2 mornings after the trip into town, Florence stepped down from the porch with a basket on her arm and a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. Franklin was already near the barn, sleeves rolled to the elbow, pulling nails from a warped plank with the claw of a hammer. His injured arm moved stiffly, but he didn't favor it anymore. Not much. She crossed the yard, dirt soft underfoot from last week's rain. I'm heading to the canyon, she said. The trap line runs dry if I don't check it. He set the hammer down. You go out there alone, most days. Take the rifle. She met his eyes. I always do. He nodded once, then turned back to the board. The walk to the canyon took most of the day. She didn't rush. The air held the faint bite of autumn, and the cottonwoods along the low creek had started to yellow at the tips. A hawk crossed overhead, silent and sure. By the time she reached the last trap, the sun sat low and gold behind the hills. She found a single hair caught clean. She reset the snare and tucked the animal into her basket, then turned to climb back up the rise when something caught her eye. A boot print. Wide, deep set, fresh. She crouched beside it, frowning. It pointed toward the trail that ran along the ridge, one she hadn't used since the spring. Her pulse ticked faster. By the time she stepped back into the yard, dusk had blurred the edges of the trees. Franklin stood at the rain barrel washing his hands, his shirt damp with sweat. He looked up. You find anything? Somebody's been near the ridge trail. Big man. Recent? He dried his hands and reached for the rifle propped against the post. You think it's one of them? I don't know. I've never seen prints shaped like that this close in. He checked the chamber. Tomorrow I'll go up with you. I want to see them myself. She studied his face, the edge of weariness behind his eyes, the conviction that never quite left it. We'll leave early, she said. That night, after the children had gone to bed, she sat beside the stove, sewing a tear in the curtain. Franklin whittled at a scrap of pine, curls of wood falling to the floor. The silence between them had grown companionable, something soft-edged, not heavy. You got family somewhere? She asked without looking up. Not anymore. How long's it been? Since I was 17. She set the cloth in her lap. That's a long time to be alone. I got used to it, didn't mean I liked it. She watched him carve another curl from the wood. Why did you become a ranger? He didn't answer right away. I saw a man kill someone in front of me and walk free. I was too young to do anything, told myself I'd never be helpless again. She nodded slowly. You weren't born to it then. No, I chose it. She picked up her needle again. That makes sense. When the wind picked up, he rose and checked the latch on the door before banking the fire. As he passed her chair, he paused. I was wrong about something, he said. She raised her eyes. I said you saved my life. That wasn't all. You made me want to keep living. She didn't speak, only looked at him. Something shifting behind her gaze, something unspoken but understood. He nodded and stepped away. By dawn, they were already saddled. Hazel and Levy stayed behind with a neighbor boy Florence had sent for the night before. The wind was dry and warm, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust. They rode in silence until the sun broke over the ridge. At the trailhead, Florence dismounted and led him to the boot print. Franklin crouched beside it, running his fingers along the edge. This man's heavy. Wears spurs. Drag in the left foot, could be wounded. She scanned the brush. Wouldn't be one of Bell's men, maybe. Could be one of the men I was tracking. One of them took a round in the leg. He stood slowly, eyes on the horizon. There's a rise just north of here. Good vantage. We'll check it. They climbed until the horses had to be left behind. The wind pushed at them as they moved higher, the ground rocky and uneven. At the top, they dropped low and crawled the last few yards. A camp. One tent, a cold fire, and a saddlebag hanging from a branch. No horse. Franklin motioned her back, then stepped forward, rifle raised. He circled the camp, then reached for the bag. Inside maps, a black powder pouch, and a folded letter bearing the seal of the Helena Land Office. He held it up. That's how they're doing it. Forgeries. She took the letter, eyes scanning the fine handwriting. That's Bell's signature. Whoever's working with him is in this up to their neck. He looked around. This man'll be back soon. We should go. They moved fast down the slope. Halfway to the horses, a shot rang out, splitting the air. Franklin dropped behind a boulder, dragging her down with him. 2 men, he said, peering around the stone. One's the wounded one, the other's tall. I saw them near Fort Benton. Florence reached for her rifle. We can't stay here. We won't. They moved on his count, sprinting low between rocks. Another shot whined past her ear. She didn't flinch. At the bottom, the horses still stood tethered. They mounted and rode hard, the sound of hooves behind them, then fading. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun hung low again. Franklin slid from the saddle, face pale with exertion. You're bleeding, she said, reaching for his arm. He shook his head. Just tore the stitches. I'll fix it later. Inside, she pressed a cloth to his arm while he sat at the table, breathing steady. That letter's enough to open an investigation, he said. It proves Bell's been claiming land that isn't his. You'll take it into town. Not yet. I want to know who else is involved. She folded the cloth. You think it goes deeper? I know it does. He reached for her wrist, fingers warm and firm. You're braver than most men I've ridden with. She met his gaze. You're not alone anymore. She didn't pull her hand away, neither did he. The quiet held between them until the fire burned down low. The letter stayed hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the cabin's corner, wrapped in oilskin and tucked behind a cracked copy of Poor Richard's almanac. Florence had placed it there herself, fingers careful, heart steady. They'd agreed not to ride into Helena until they knew which county officials Jasper Bell had folded into his pocket. A day and a half after the gunfire in the canyon, Franklin reached the trailhead alone. He moved slower than he once had, but the stiffness in his shoulder had eased enough to let him ride without wincing. Florence watched from the fence line until he disappeared beyond the ridgeline, then turned back to the half-mended henhouse. Hazel and Levy were at the neighbors again, trading eggs for salt and lye. She'd sent them early with a basket and a warning not to linger. The hammer swung clean in her hand, the rhythm settling into her like breath. By mid-morning, she had the roof slats reset and the wire tucked back into place. The hens, restless but unharmed, clucked as she unlatched the coop door. When Franklin returned near dusk, his horse lathered and his coat dusted white at the cuffs. She was tending the stove, stirring cornmeal into a pot of water and bacon grease. "They're gone," he said, easing onto the bench near the table. She didn't turn. "The men from the canyon cleared camp. Took the saddlebag, left the rest. I tracked them east, but they split off near the foothills. No sign they're doubling back." She set the spoon down and faced him. "Then they know we have the letter," he nodded. "Or they're hunting Bell's next mark." She crossed her arms. "They'll keep pressing until someone stops them." "I aim to." They ate in quiet, the pot scraped clean by the time the fire burned low. Outside, the mule brayed once, then settled again. Franklin leaned back, hands folded over his middle. "The man forging those deeds, his name's Dunley. He's from Missouri. Used to be a county registrar before he came west. Lost his post over missing tax records. You think Jasper brought him in? He didn't find him by accident." Florence watched the shadows shift across the floorboards. "How many people do you think he's stolen land from?" "At least 6 families between here and Three Forks, maybe more. Most folded fast. Others ended up gone before they could contest it." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You think he had them run off? I think if we wait too long, we'll never prove he did." She pulled an envelope from the mantel and handed it to him. "This came while you were gone. From Helena. Addressed to you, but the writing looked official." He broke the seal and read silently. The lines drawn across his brow deepened. "They're sending a deputy marshal," he said. "He'll arrive in 8 days. They want us to hold steady until he does." She sat across from him, elbows resting on her knees. "Hold steady means stay quiet, means we wait without stirring the wrong hornet's nest." Florence stared at the flame curling in the lantern glass. "I don't want to wait, I know, but I will." "For 8 days," he nodded. "That's all I ask." The next morning, Franklin took Levy out past the cottonwood stand. They carried a tin pail and a pair of fishing lines Franklin had carved himself. Florence watched them go from the porch, the boys' laugh carrying on the breeze. She spent the day sewing a new hem into Hazel's dress, then boiled water for soap and scrubbed the floor clean. She didn't like stillness, it made her mind turn in circles, but the cabin felt steadier with Franklin's coat hanging by the door. That evening, after the children were asleep, he found her on the back steps, sleeves rolled, hands clasped between her knees. "You haven't said what you'll do after." She didn't look up. "After what? After the land's safe? After Bell's done?" She was quiet a moment. "I don't know. I think you do." She turned her head. "You planning to ride on?" "I was." She searched his face. "And now," he exhaled slow, "now I don't want to." Florence leaned back against the step rail. "You're not the only one." He looked at her then, fully, and she didn't look away. The air between them had changed, no longer cautious, no longer waiting. "I never had a place to go back to," he said. "Not since I left Kentucky. I thought it suited me being untethered. And now, I think I want to be tethered." She stood and stepped down beside him, their shoulders brushing. She didn't speak, just rested her hand on his wrist, her touch sure. He turned his palm up to hold hers. They sat there as the stars came out, not speaking, not needing to. Neither asked what came next. They already knew. The deputy marshal arrived 5 days later, 2 days ahead of schedule, riding a chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose and a badge dulled by sun. His name was Elias Cotter, a lean man with a faded collar and a scar that ran along the line of his jaw like a drawn string. Florence met him outside the cabin, Hazel holding her apron and Levy hiding behind the doorframe. Franklin came out a moment later, his coat buttoned, his rifle slung barrel down across his back. Elias dismounted slow, his eyes taking in the cabin, the field, the half-built shed beside the barn. He nodded once. "You Foster?" Franklin stepped forward. "I am. You filed a report on land fraud. Official seal signed by a judge up in Helena. That your hand?" Franklin reached into his coat and handed over the folded letter. "That's the original. There's a second set of forgeries in town, in Jasper Bell's office. We know where they're kept." Elias opened the letter, read it without blinking. "You got witness testimony?" "I do." Florence stepped closer. "So do I." The marshal looked her over, then gave a short nod. "You're the one he's trying to take land from. I'm the one he's been threatening." He folded the paper and tucked it into his vest. "Then we ride in tonight, before word spreads." Franklin's jaw tightened. You'll need someone who knows the bank's layout. I'll need both of you. Florence shook her head. I can't leave the children. I'll stay with them, Franklin said. You go with Cotter. She hesitated, eyes flicking to him. You sure? I trust you. Elias gave them an hour. Florence packed a satchel with her father's deed, along with 3 names written in her own hand, the neighboring ranchers who'd come to her in the weeks after her father's death. Each of them with stories and suspicions, none of them brave enough to speak alone. She took her shawl from the peg by the door and kissed Hazel's forehead, then Levy's before stepping into the dusk. They rode the south trail, the long way into town, keeping clear of the main road. Elias asked nothing until they reached the edge of the cotton mill's empty yard, now overgrown and quiet. You always been here? He asked. My father bought the land in '62, cleared it with his own hands, died last spring, and Bell started buying land in earnest 2 years back. Cheap offers first, then threats, then forged claims, Elias nodded. I've seen it before, usually ends with a fire. They tied the horses behind the livery and walked the last block on foot. Town was quiet, most windows dark but for the saloon where a fiddle scraped out a crooked tune over low laughter. Bell's bank stood square and still, its shutters pulled and the front lock bolted. Elias pulled a ring of keys from his coat. Got these off the clerk before he skipped town. You go in first, I'll follow once the back is clear. Inside, the bank smelled of old ink and damp paper. Florence moved without hesitation, past the teller's window and into the back hall. She found the cabinet behind the ledger desk, the one Bell had kept locked since spring. She pried it open with a letter knife. Inside were 15 folded deeds, 2 seals and a book of names, some crossed out, others marked with dates. She took them all. Elias appeared in the doorway just as she was latching the satchel. That's everything. It's enough. They stepped out into the night, the wind dry and chill against her cheeks. At the corner, 3 men waited, one with a shotgun, one with a lantern, and one she recognized by the tilt of his hat. Jasper Bell. You think you're clever, he said, voice low and tight. But this town runs on my word. You think anyone's gonna listen to a widow and a half-healed lawman? Elias stepped forward. They'll listen to me. Marshal Elias Cotter. You're under arrest. Jasper's hand went to his belt, but the man with the lantern raised his arms. I ain't dying for no banker. The shotgun clattered to the ground. Jasper froze. Florence stepped past Elias and faced him. This land belonged to my father. You tried to steal it while my brother and sister slept under a leaky roof. You came with threats and lies. Well, I'm done being quiet. He didn't speak, didn't blink. Elias cuffed his hands behind his back and led him away. Florence rode home before dawn. She found Franklin on the porch, boots crossed at the ankle, a rifle across his lap. He stood as she dismounted, his eyes finding hers immediately. It's done, she said. He reached for her hand. You're safe. I am. They stood there in the hush of early light, the first bird calls rising from the trees. Florence turned to look at the land, the fence line, the shed, the field beyond. It's ours, she said. Still, Franklin squeezed her hand. No, he said, it's yours. But if you'll have me, I'll stay, build the rest of that shed, put in a second well, help raise them. She looked up at him, her eyes steady and clear. I want that. He leaned forward and kissed her, soft and certain. When the sun rose behind the hills, it found 2 figures on the porch, hands clasped, faces tilted toward the light. The cabin stood firm behind them, and in the yard, the dog barked once and then lay down, content. The first real snow came the week after Jasper Bell was taken north. It wasn't much, just a lace of white over the roof and the edges of the pasture fence, but it stayed through the morning, clinging to the low grass and the mule's shaggy coat. Franklin stood at the woodpile with an axe in hand, sleeves rolled, breath rising in thin clouds. He split the last round of pine, then brought the pieces to the porch, stacking them beneath the awning Florence had helped him build. Inside, she was kneading dough, her hands dusted with flour, the children bent over slates by the stove. Levy was working through a column of numbers, tongue caught at the corner of his mouth. Hazel hummed under her breath, copying letters slow and careful. Franklin stepped in, brushing snow from his shoulders. "There's a coyote trail crossing near the creek. Might be worth setting a few traps." Florence didn't pause her work. "They'll come closer if the weather turns again." "I'll run the line at first light." She looked up at that. "I'll go with you." He nodded, then came to stand behind her, eyes on the bread rising in the bowl. "Smells like something worth staying in for. You'll earn your share if you mind the fire." He reached around and plucked a bit of dough from the edge. She swatted his hand with the back of her wrist, but the smile that passed between them was quiet and easy. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat near the hearth. Franklin had taken to carving again, slow, steady work with a pocket knife and a block of cottonwood. Florence embroidered a strip of linen she'd started last spring, her stitches small and even. "You ever think of expanding the field?" he asked. She glanced at him. "Too rocky past the cottonwoods. What about west, toward the slope? Soil looked strong when I walked it. There's a spring under that ridge. My father tried to dig it out once, but the clay kept caving." He ran a thumb along the wood's edge. "We could try again. If we cleared it, might be space enough for a second crop." She set her needle down. "You thinking of staying through next season?" He looked at her steady. "I'm thinking of staying for all of them." She didn't speak right away, but her hand found his, fingers lacing without hesitation. The fire popped once, low and warm. By midwinter, the cabin walls were chinked tight, and the roof held through 2 storms without leaking. Franklin built a sled from scrap lumber and hauled wood from the far stand with Levy bundled beside him. Hazel learned to sew a hem without pricking her thumb, and Florence traded preserves for seed with the widow at the edge of the valley. One morning, as the last of the snow melted off the fence rails, a letter arrived. It came by rider, carried from Helena, and bore the seal of the territorial court. Franklin read it in silence, then passed it to Florence. Jasper Bell had been convicted of fraud, sentenced to 10 years in Deer Lodge. The forged deeds were voided. Her land and 5 others were restored by law. She folded the letter and set it on the table. "That's the end of it." Franklin rested a hand on her shoulder. "You never needed a badge to win, just your own backbone." She leaned into his touch. "I didn't win it alone." Spring came slow, the thaw stretching into April, but when the first green pushed through the garden bed, Florence was already planting. Franklin built a new trough for the mule, then patched the barn roof where the last snow had bowed it in. They worked without rush, the kind of rhythm that came only from certainty. One morning she found him in the pasture, a ring of wildflowers in his hand. Not perfect, just a loop of soft stems and pale purple petals. He offered it without a word, fingers brushing hers. She took it, eyes warm. "You planning something?" He stepped close. "I was hoping you'd marry me." Florence looked at him, at the man who had stood beside her through storm and silence and fight. She didn't need time to think. "Yes," she said. They married under the cottonwoods, just as the branches greened. No preacher came. Just Franklin, Florence, the children, and a vow spoken plain and honest in the wind. Levy carried 2 iron rings Franklin had hammered from a broken stirrup. Hazel held a wreath of new blossoms. That evening they danced on the porch to the sound of frogs calling from the creek. Franklin held her hand light, his palm warm against her back, and Florence laughed, the sound full and free under the open sky. Years passed. The field doubled, then tripled. The spring on the ridge held, and Franklin dug it deeper with Florence steadying the post beams as he lowered the bucket. Levy grew tall and sure, his handwriting straight as fence wire. Hazel stitched her first quilt before 14, her hands as careful as her mother's. Franklin and Florence grew older with the land. They added a second room to the cabin, then a third. A cradle came one summer, then another child born between the rains, eyes dark like his mother's. They never left, never needed to. And in the quiet hours when the candles burned low and the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, they sat together, fingers twined, hearts at peace. No more running. No more waiting, Just two people who had chosen each other again and again until the choosing became home.